Start.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be sing.
Oh, say
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Anybody want to sing God Bless America?
No, I think let's move ahead.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Gumaer Cemetery.
Full volume, Judy.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Gumaer Cemetery. I'm Judy Gumaer Testa. I pronounce my name a little differently than some of my cousins, but we all know better not to correct our grandmother. And if Reverend Rose will join me.
I'm Ann Rust. I'm the pastor of the Deer Park Reformed Church. I love this speaker stand. Isn't this wonderful? Yes. It's perfect for the woods. Let me offer up a prayer. Gracious and almighty God, we give you thanks here in the middle of your creation for this place of peace and rest. We give you thanks for the people who have so lovingly researched and restored and worked here. And we give you thanks for our ancestors who lie here, but whose souls reside with you. And we ask your blessing on this gathering, on this day, as once again people gather in this spot. And these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
This is a great turnout. It's, I think Deer Park, Orange County should be proud. I'm going to be reading a poem that Georgine Ogden Okapaw, who is my cousin, first cousin, wrote in 1987. Georgine is 88. She'd been a Russian scholar, had lived at the lake for many years, and funny thing is she's now in a nursing home in Brooklyn, in which it's filled with Russians, so she's at home there. Just the reason we're all here today is because of one man, Louis XIV, who, if we call him the Sun King, I say that with great irony, He set the sun and bankrupted France, and the Huguenots, the Gumaers, and the Cutterbacs who settled this valley, Jacques Cutterback and Pierre Gumaer, escaped together, made it to this country, and then had the foresight to land up in, after being in Maryland, land up in New Paltz and marry the daughters of the most prominent people there. What could be better for a new entry into the United States? And then they came down here, and then this became Peenpack. And this is a poem called Family Pilgrimage. I left a message with Georgine. She's very happy it's being read. In the deep shadowed valley below, in the Chewongo Mountains towards the Poconos, along the shallow Neversink River, where the water runs molten silver, over moss-covered rocks and smooth flat stones, past the watercress-filled spring pond, past old root cellars and shaky stone walls, following the imprint of a long wood road, we approached the Gumaer gravesite, where pioneer Pierre Gumaer, 1666 to 1739, his son, Peter, and grandson, Ezekiel, father of Peter E., your great-grandfather, and my great-great-grandfather, lay buried amidst brown pine needles and late autumn leaves. Few stones were upright. Most stood slanting or were strewn, half broken on the ground. Some green, fungus, had now illegible epitaphs. Captain Cutterback, the commander of Fort Gumaer, lay near his pioneer ancestor Jacques, who came to Peenpack with Pierre. We reconnoitered the lay of the graveland near the fenced-in towering stone of Godefroy, the latecomer, whose name somehow usurped Peenpack and Port Clinton. Minutely, we studied the stonework to figure out what needed to be done to resurrect the memorials, clean them, and to cordon off that pine tree plot on the promontory rising above Peenpack. Plain, Peenpack Plain, to protect it from trespassers. Then we walked along a different route, through deep, tall pine-scented woods, and suddenly came upon Peter E.'s old stone house, formerly Fort Depew. How lovely was the view of that sturdy vintage stone house, shining pink in the sunny late afternoon autumn. Ivy climbing up its stout sides on its large, flat expanse of lawn, rolling towards the west, stretching toward the former site of Elizabeth Clock's mansion. That sunlit view of the old stone house was a benediction to that afternoon's journey back in time to almost 300 years ago, when Pierre, Jacques, and other of the Peenpack patentees entered this tall-grassed Chewongo Valley, extending to where the Neversink flows into the Delaware, and lived here, died here.
Join me, please.
No.
Nancy is the executive director of the Minnesink Valley Historical Society and a member of the committee for the Gumaer Cemetery Trust.
Speak up.
We should have all had rakes though. Rake everybody. To come up the hill, you got to rake. We want to thank Carl Krabenik, supervisor. The Orange County legislator Dennis Simmons had something else going on today, and Floyd Santini is representing him. We did provide flags for the military stones. Dr. Keith Gumaer. If it wasn't for him, we would not be enough money in the trust to pay for the maintenance of the cemetery. It's the first that we've really had an organized maintenance, and we've been working hard with just a handful of volunteers. He invested that money in the Community Foundation of Orange and Sullivan. They've done an excellent job. I don't know what they invested in. I'd like to invest myself because they've been doing really great. We've gotten over the last 5 years a little over $10,000. And that's been used to hire someone to take down trees and do the things that somebody should have insurance for. We don't like volunteers up here because it's Deer Park Reformed Church's insurance and Innocent Valley because we sponsor it. So anybody with equipment has to have insurance. But rakes, you don't need insurance for. Right. Pomeroy Foundation for this beautiful sign you're going to see. And the Deer Park Reformed Church also has a small legacy that Dr. Gumaer had given them, and they mulched a lot of the trees that we've had taken down. Mr. Robert Northorpe, he was a historian, loved cemeteries, loved maintaining them and organizing them and finding them and protecting them. And he started out with us when we first started. He's passed away a year ago. And we miss him, but he was really instrumental in organizing us to do this the right way. And last but not least, put on the back, I'm a Deer Park historian who her 501c3 or government organization was able to apply to the Pomeroy Foundation. You'll see there's a very limited amount of words that we have to deal with. There were a lot more things we'd like to say, but it's good enough. Thank you all for coming. And I guess we'll look for volunteers.
This is not your player.
Norma?
This is great. I'm a retired teacher, so I'm going to use my outside voice. Good. When I always told the kids, use your inside voices. And I'd like to welcome you all to the town of Deer Park, those of you who are visiting. Glad to have you. I always call this God's country because it's such a beautiful place. I was asked to give the history of Deer Park.
Oh no.
Would you like to stay until tomorrow? It did start with 7 families who came here that impact the Gumaers and the Cutterback for Huguenots. The others, families, were from Holland, Swordouts, Tice, and Jameson. And they settled here, and it was virgin forest, very, very hard to believe that they cut out their own farms to live here. From that time to today, a lot of things have happened in the town of Deer Park. At that time, this was Ulster County. It was not Orange County. The town of Deer Park was cut in half. Half of it was in Orange County, the lower half, the Port Jervis half, and this northern settlement was in Ulster County. So those of you who are doing genealogy, that's where you're going to go. Either Ulster County, Sullivan County, Mamakating, because this was part of Mamakating in the census. And from that time on, it was just farms until about 1828. In 1828, the D&H Canal came through here. It was built in 3 years. It brought the coal from the mountains of Pennsylvania along the Delaware and up to the Hudson. It also carried the flagstone, the bluestone,
which built the sidewalks of New York, as well as lumber and other products. And that changed this area a great deal. From being very small farms, self-sufficient, to bringing in all kinds of, in that time, industry. Blacksmiths, boat builders, you name it, anything that was needed along the canal. The canal was built in 3 years with nothing more than picks, shovels, and wheelbarrows and a few mules. No machinery of any kind. From there, we moved on to the railroad. There were many railroads here, the Erie, the Port Jervis, Monticello. Railroad came through here. This brought the people who were escaping the heat from New York City because there was no air conditioning, and we had the industry of many resorts being here. And again, the picture of Deer Park changed. In the beginning of the 1900s, many people came up here to make movies. D.W. Griffith, Wayne, who else was here? Lillian Gish,
Gish. Yep.
Mary Pickford.
Mary Pickford. That's what I couldn't.
Tony Pastor and the girls, the vaudeville girls.
So there were many famous people here, and they stayed with the Godefroys, the usurpers. And I have the paper of how it was usurped, because the Port Jervis, port at that time, this area was called Port Clinton because of the canal, and they needed a post office, so they applied for a post office, and it says at the top, Port Clinton, crossed out with big letters over in it, Godefroy. That's how we wound up with Godefroy, who was buried over here. And it was, they had a huge estate here, which was beautiful, and many buildings here. And there were 2 sisters. One was Plock, which was mentioned in the previous speaker. We're now up into the 1900s, and what you see here today is what, after we got air conditioning, the decline of the resorts. Instead, after World War II, this became like a bedroom community. People commute all the way to the city. Some of us came up here and stayed because we loved it up here, and we've made our homes here. And I welcome you all to the town of Deer Park, and I hope you have a good time today. And that was 2 days worth of talk. And thank you for inviting me, and good luck with your project.
Next order of business, Mr. Bravenak.
Thank you. Welcome everybody to the town of Deer Park. I'm Carl Brabenek. I'm the town supervisor. And thank you, Judy, for inviting me here today. I did not even know about this place until today, and it's amazing. But I've been the town supervisor for about 4 years now, and each and every day I learn something new about the town of Deer Park, about its history, about its people, and I find it absolutely fascinating. All of the stories and the achievements and the hard work that all of the families here in the town did to improve the town of Deer Park, to make it what it is today, to even improve our great county, Orange County, and also our state of New York. We've had many people that have passed through the town of Deer Park that have been very notable and that have contributed to this great area. But I do want to recognize some of our current and former officials that are here. Flo Santini, our town clerk. She's been here about 10 years as the town clerk, works every day and does a fantastic job for everybody. And also tries to get as much information or compile as much historical information as possible, helping out with Norma, our historian. We have a former town supervisor here and county legislator, Wayne Decker, and also a former councilman, Warren Cuddeback, and both of them are part of Deer Park's history. They're part of what made Deer Park what it is today. Peter Gumaer was actually a former town supervisor. I believe he served 6 years as the town supervisor in the town of Deer Park in the early 1800s. So, that, again, part of history, people that made us what it is today. And in Deer Park, we love history, and we have probably the best historian in the state of New York, is Norma Schott. She put together, absolutely, Norma put together probably what is the model for New York State for historical markers, and I believe we have the most historical markers out of any town in New York State, or we're probably one of the leaders. So she has done that. She has compiled our history, and she is making sure that future generations don't forget who the contributions and who made this town what it is today. So thank you, Norma, for your contributions. Thank you to the Gumaer family and all the families that are here today, and thank you very much for being here on this wonderful day.
History of the Gumaer Cemetery.
Project.
In 1839, Peter E. Gumaer decided with his fellow peen packers. How many here are peen packers? How many of you know what a peen packer is? See, I see 3 Gumaers in the front row that aren't all 4. Right. Peen packer is either a sport out, a cutaback,
No,
a Gumaer,
you're a peen packer.
then it would have
Look it up.
well, you know, some
Later?
Gumaers. Let's see another one. Hi, Betty.
Raise your hand. Does she
So how
know?
many are peen packers here? Is my generic term, all inclusive? Come on, Don. Joe,
Raise your hand.
Bruce. Well, back to the story. During the winter of 1839, Peter E. Gumaer set about the task of ensuring the preservation of his family's cemetery. Not only of his family, but of his community. The cemetery was founded by the necessity of the ages, and he appealed to his peers, 34 other gentlemen in the community, to pay for the survey, the fence, and then deeding the cemetery to the Reformed Church in Deer Park. He was very methodical about his operations, how he did it. As I said, he had a list of subscribers. Each of them paid a fee. He had a very specific committee of 3, which you'll find comes up again in the history of the cemetery, where they contracted with William Cutaback of present-day Cutabackville to build a fence around a previously surveyed piece of land, down to the last nail, down to what kind of wood, very specifically. He then took upon the task to deed the cemetery to the Dutch Reformed Church for the consideration of $1 in perpetuity.
Mommy, I need to go play.
However, somewhere along our history, the cemetery was forgotten or kept secret, held close. In approximately about 1994, Peter Oswald of the Menacing Family Historical Society, through the insight of Lucille Gumaer Ogden, brought it to the forefront. It was her passion, her life's work, to see the cemetery preserved. We move forward a few years later. Dr. Kenneth Gumaer comes on the scene and wholeheartedly embraces the whole mission of the cemetery. I had the pleasure and the honor of knowing Dr. Gumaer personally. He was a very wonderful, humble, sincere man. He put others before himself, including his country. Little known fact about Dr. Gumaer was he was a Merrill's marauder. He was a hero's hero. He was a veterinarian and did so in the line of duty for his country. Unfortunately, well, for me, Dr. Gumaer passed away in September of 2008. I'm hoping he's here today. You know, I'm sure he is. But I'd rather him be able to be present and see this and share this moment with all of you. A few interesting facts about the cemetery is when Peter E. Gumaer was developing the whole process of transferring ownership, he referred to it as the burial ground of the white persons in one document. And finally, and probably auspiciously, the final deed, it says public burial ground. It's been known as the Cutterback Cemetery. It's been known, obviously, the Gumaer Cemetery. That phrase was coined by Ruttenberg and Clark in 1881 with a specific detail about the neglect and the lack of caring of family members. I don't think there was a lack of care of family members, just probably not the means. It's been called the Peenpack Cemetery. And I'm sure there's ones I've forgotten. Oh, yeah. There is one I forgot. Pioneer Knoll. Pioneer Knoll was an incorporation of the three cemeteries, this one being the Slave Cemetery furthest north here, the Settlers Cemetery, which is to my right, and Mr. Adolf Godefroy Cemetery all the way to my right, left.
You're right.
But it was Dr. Gumaer's express interest that they all be treated as one, not one forsaken for the other. However, the name Pioneer Knoll is indicative to a hill about 1/8 of a mile across the railroad grade from here. Pioneer Knoll was a phrase that was pretty much monikered by William Lewis Cutterback, a local doctor in Port Jervis and in Deer Park, and the historian of the Cutterback family. And what Pioneer Knoll is, and remains today, is a small island surrounded by water. One side by a brook, and the other side by a stream. And that was the site of the first settlers. As Norma said, Jacques Quebec was a Huguenot. Pierre Gumaer was a Huguenot. The Swartout brothers, Thomas, Bernardus, and Anthony, they were Dutch. Jan Thijs was Dutch. David Jameson, he was a Scotsman. He was, ironically, the secretary for the governor of the region, Benjamin Beecher. That's the history of the cemetery. We're going to unveil the marker. Betty Testa, will you come up, please? For those who don't know my mother, turn around. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
All right. Do that again.
Take two.
Can you guys hold up the banner? Can you hold up the blue thing and hold it up?
Pretend you're doing it
Pretend we're doing it again.
Got it in action.
For the B-roll.
So like the second take of Iwo Jima.
Right, right. Keep you warm.
Nancy, can I join me again, please? I love Nancy. Can we talk before they come out? Or to the next cemetery cleanup in September.
In September, yes, mark that with the date. Third Saturday in September. Bring the race. Come for an hour. Don't have to come for the whole time. We got lots of leaves. I want to thank you all for coming. It's very impressive. I do have a few handouts. I brought a few of them. They were a listing by Gloria Hall that she donated to the society. And it's 31 stones that actually are legible of the time she did them. Yeah, we found a few since, but this is a listing we have. And I also have a map if anybody's interested.
Nancy, could you just give them just a sense in case they walk around of the...
Yes, yeah.
May I just say a word? The Gumaer Cemetery is 3 cemeteries. I want to be very clear about that. The irony of history is that you have French Huguenots who fled here after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. They escaped with their lives and hid out, made it to the United States. Many went to England. Their freedom was their freedom. They came to a country that was just beginning to become a slave-owning country. Bob Dylan calls slavery America's original sin. We could debate that. Perhaps the treatment of Native Americans was the first. However, several of the founding families, many of the founding families, had 1 or 2 slaves, and hence we have a slave cemetery. We do have records of manumission, which is the freeing of slaves, but I think the whole cemetery needs to be looked at in totality. So that's, I think, an important thing. By the way, if you are going to be walking through here, exploring, and the orange markers that we have not done a ground penetrating radar identifying all the burial sites, but we've marked what we think are. When we know, it will certainly be published and you will hear about it. That's one of the next stages. And just before everybody breaks up, whoever is a Gumaer, cut it back. Please meet here. We're going to have some photographs, the family photographs, by the sign, and with the record and a couple of the other newspapers.
You didn't tell us
Sword
who
out.
you were.
What?
You didn't tell us when you spoke who you are.
Oh, let me see. Peter E. Gumaer was my great-great-grandfather, and his son, Peter Lowe Gumaer, and his brothers ran the old canal store where Seth Goldman lives, and they had a house, and they also were bridge builders. They built a suspension bridge across the Neversink. Some of you may have seen the historic photos. And also, as entrepreneurial, these Huguenots, if anything, were entrepreneurial. They built a road up the mountain to meet the railroad. They saw the writing on the wall with the canal, that it was going to be time out for the canal, time for the 19th century. And they created a lake. They discovered mines. So one thing led to another. Then they made a hotel, and there was a big community up there, right at Gumaer. And it was known as Gumaer. 500 people lived there in the 1870s, 1880s, when the mining was taking place. So that's just a little context.
We do have we like to think of this as one cemetery.
Yes.
Because we treat it as one. That may be a slave cemetery. It just may be early, some of them may just be early stones, field stones, with a slave section. We're not sure until we get something in. The early stones didn't have any marking on them. The stones that are there, that are legible, there's 2 stones. One says Adam Gumaer, and the other one is William and Floor. One's on the reverse side. Floor is a very common slave name in the area, and we've seen it in Peter Gumaer's records and his journals.
What's that first name that you said? Floor.
Floor.
F-L-O-R, as in flower.
Dutch for flower.
L-O-O-R.
Yeah.
1-0.
Sometimes it's 1-0, sometimes it's 2. On the stone it's 2.
So that was a common first name among the slaves.
Yes, it was.
Summed up.
But those are the only 2 stones that have any kind of inscription on them over there. So far that we found.
Could I just,
This one has not been taken care of in
that's right.
any record that we have. That section has not been taken care of, so we don't know what's there. We've been working on that year and a half now.
We're working with the Schomburg Center up in Harlem, and with additional funds, we hope to be hiring an African-American slave expert. I just want to say something about the funny spelling. Gumaer, Guimaer, with a D, without a D. The original spelling of the Gumaer family was they were salt merchants from the western part of France, outside of La Rochelle. Guimard. You do not pronounce the D. Guimaer. And as the Dutch were kind of running things here, they did the spelling phonetically, so it evolved. As Gumaers moved away from here, the pronunciations changed. So as Judy was saying, we have everything from Gumaer, Gumaer, Gumaer.
Each pronunciation is a branch of the family.
And that is, so it breaks itself up. I do want to say that I am particularly happy to see people from Guimard Lake and from the greater community here. It's very heartening. Thank you.
Now, we also have a dead space in here. A dead space, I didn't mean to say. And what may be the slave cemetery. There are 2 stones that are outside of that definitely have initials on them. What's in here? We don't know yet because we haven't touched it. There may be a whole another.
That's next year.
That's next year's project. This one is the one that's been cleaned the most. Not enough, but cleaned more frequently. There are definitely stones in there. And then you'll see a little fenced area. That's Mr. Godfrey's private cemetery. It's just he and his wife. Huge blue stone marker that you may want to take a look at.
Earlier before the program, I walked the grounds with Marge Fuller from the Old Mine Road chapter of the DAR, and we laid bouquets at each cemetery. I chose wheat and rush to represent the pioneers that came here. And the story that I was told by Lucille Ogden when I was a little girl about this whole valley being reeds and swamp, and how my ancestors came here and tamed the community.
So is that. You're free to wander.
Okay, 1780s.
Oh, and it burned down in 1860.